Welcome to the Passive Income Podcast. I am your host, Dividend Dave. Please be sure to click that subscribe button below and join the Passive Income Posse. I am so super stoked to have Craig on today's episode, and you will find out why when he gives himself a brief introduction. Go ahead, Craig.
All right. First of all, I just want to thank you for inviting me on. It's really great. You've been doing a great job of reaching out to people on Twitter and finding all the dividend investors on Twitter and getting them on here and putting a face to everybody's name. And I'm pretty new to
Thank you.
the Div Twit world, and I was welcomed with open arms. And it's an amazing community. It's been a lot of fun, and like a few months, 1,000+ followers in a few months. So it's really been great. I'm born Canadian, but I live in the U.S. now. I've been here for about 5.5 years now. I'm originally I was born in Saskatchewan, of all places, and then raised in a little town called Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. And then I went to school in Windsor, Ontario, and then spent most of my adult life in the Toronto area, Stouffville and Scarborough. And then we moved to Florida a few years ago. So, yeah, most of my investing when I was in Canada, I was mostly investing RSPs, mutual funds, ETFs. And now when I got down here, I got a little more excited, a little more into it, and I spread my wings out a little bit. But it's funny, I'll tell a story, but we'll get into it more. But basically,
Yeah,
the
for
first
sure.
stock I really picked was SCHD. And then I
Yep.
went crazy, did all sorts of other stuff, and I should have just stuck with SCHD. And that's why now I'm like, SCHD, so good. So good.
So that's
Yeah.
what I was alluding to before I let you give yourself the introductions. This is going to be a very interesting and special conversation because you are a Canadian, born and raised Canadian, but now living full time in the US. So we're going to have a great perspective of both sides of the border, how it affects you, whether it's tax wise, income wise, whatever. And I know this is going to be just a great episode of the Passive Income Podcast. So yeah, Saskatchewan. It's actually kind
Yeah.
of funny because obviously we were DMing today, and prior to this, I just thought you were an American, and then you knew geography of where I lived, and I'm like, how do you know geography? Like, no offense to any American listeners, but they know they can
They
probably point to Toronto and Vancouver on a map,
Yeah, if
and
you're lucky.
yeah, and maybe Montreal or Calgary, maybe, right? And so,
Yeah,
but you were like, "Oh, you're from this town or this town?" And I'm like, "How do you know this?" And then you were all of a
yeah,
sudden, "Oh, I'm Canadian." Okay, that makes sense.
yeah. And I've traveled a lot. Obviously, being born in one side of the country or the middle of the country, and then moving to Ontario, and I've traveled a lot. My mom's from Saskatchewan, and my dad's from Guyana, and that's in South America, part of the Caribbean, really. But so I
Yep.
have diverse background. I've been a lot of places. So yeah, and that's the way I invest too. I'm like very diverse. Yeah.
Nice, good. That's great. That's great. And so, how's Florida treating you?
Oh, it's beautiful. When I first, had the opportunity to move down here, I wasn't sure about it. I love Canada. I'm Canadian, and live and die Canadian. And I was like, I don't know about living in the U.S., but it's really grown on me. It's a great place. I mean, everything's got its pros and cons, right? But
Sure.
you can't beat the weather. It's incredible. I mean, I was swimming yesterday in my pool in the backyard. Like it's January. It's amazing. You can't.
You were
It's
swimming
paradise.
yesterday in January,
Yes.
and tomorrow I'm expecting 20 centimeters of snow. So that's
Exactly. Yeah. I do not miss that. I had fun when I was a kid, but I've had enough of it. Shoveling that stuff and driving it. No thanks. I'm good.
right. Awesome. So yeah, let's just dive right into it. And first high top on the list is SCHD. I know you're a huge fan as your Twitter handle and even here on screen. SCHD on Twitter, you can find Craig at SCHD ETF. I believe that's correct, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's and then like I was telling you, a lot of people call me Stan, which I understand, right? Like people just grab something. People probably, if you dividend in there, they'll call you dividend something or whatever. They'll grab whatever
Yeah.
they see in your Twitter handle. So everyone calls me Stan, but my name's Craig. And that the meaning behind Stan, a lot of people get it. Some people just don't. It doesn't click. But it's like a Stan is a crazy fan, like the Eminem song stand. So, and
Right.
SCHD, if you've probably realized, it has quite a cult following.
Yep.
And what's really interesting about that is it's sometimes something everyone's interested in and on board on the bandwagon. I usually don't want anything to do with that. Usually I'll go in the other direction. But with
For
this
sure.
one is there's something special about SHD. There's a reason why people are fanatical about it.
Yep.
It is a really great ETF. It's a great investment, period.
Not financial advice. Do
Oh,
your own due
exactly. I
diligence.
definitely want to say that, and you hear that all the time. And that's one of the things I want to talk about too, is that, I was steered the wrong way many times. But I listened to a lot of stuff on YouTube, on Twitter. Take it all in, but you got to do your own research. You really got to, and I can't tell you how important that is. No matter what
Oh, for sure.
anybody tells you, it could be Warren Buffett. It doesn't matter. You got to do your own research, because
Yep.
it's good advice at the time. They're paying attention to that stock. You might not be paying attention like that. So something could change. They're out. You're still sitting there and you don't know. And then boom,
You're still holding the bag, so to speak,
you're cut
right?
in half. And that leads right into SCHD, because what SCHD does is it has an algorithm, like stock filters. It has screeners that look for fundamental aspects of a stock. So they're looking for stocks that are making money, that don't have debt, that are paying a dividend, and a growing dividend. And then they score all this, and they rank it. And it's all the things that, like, hedge fund managers are doing all the time, done passively for you. And it's done by an algorithm. It's not done by people. So there's no opinion there. It's just the facts. It's the cold, hard truth. So,
Right.
I've learned, no matter how much no matter how patient I am, you make mistakes because of emotion, right? We all do it.
Yep.
We try to buy low, but you often get nervous and sell low, and buy high. It just happens. But when you've got something like SCHD who's doing that for you, weeding out, like self-cleaning itself, it really works out very well. And it's not, most ETFs are very, like, really passive. There's not a lot of screens going on. It's kind of one
Yep.
simple thing, right? Where there's a lot happening. Like, look into it, do your research, and
Yep.
have a look at screeners, because I think that's what makes a huge difference. And then the results of these screens are, you getting dividend growth in 13 to 14% per year, and for the last 5 years, you're getting performance that's on par or better than the S&P. So you're beating the market. That's not even adding in dividends yet. You add in the dividends, and you're killing the S&P, and
Right.
better downside protection. Like, and the dividend, and plus the dividend is double what you're getting with the S&P 500. So what's not to like? It's like the best of both worlds, right? And that usually just doesn't work, and it does.
So, and to your point there, a lot of the majority, well, almost every ETF, the idea of an ETF is to let someone else take care of it for you, right? It's a
Yeah.
fund. They have fund managers, and the idea is set it and forget it, and so much you don't have to think about it too much. It sounds like with SCHD, you still don't have to think about it too much, but you follow it more just because you're excited about it. You're like, wow,
Yeah.
look at this growth.
Yeah. Well, and my goal is to try to accumulate as many shares as possible, but still do it at the lowest price as possible. Because I enjoy
Right.
following, I can do that. And I don't recommend that if you're not, you do that. I do it because I enjoy it. But it is something you can just, say you have whatever, $100 a month. I'm going to just, first of the month, boom, boom, boom. But I look at it and I say, I put a certain amount of money aside every month, and then I try to find a nice day, a nice red day,
Yeah.
and buy on that day. And I have a whole method to it. Like, I set a 5-day order. Sorry, a limit that looks at the 5-day low, a limit order. So I'm
Right.
always looking back the last 5 days and set to buy one share at that lowest price in the last 5 days. And then that kind of, if I'm doing if it hits that, it triggers, okay, let's have a look, what's happening. If it continues
Right.
to drop, I'll keep an eye on it, right? Then I have levels. I look at it certain, under this. So I'm always buying a little bit. If it drops more, I buy more. Drops more, I buy even more. If it goes way down, boom, I back up the truck. And you
That's
can really, when you watch it, you can see the levels. Like, it trades
mhm,
in a range. Like, the lowest it's been is about 66, and then it gets up to maybe 81 US. And
right.
you know, you just keep
That's a
it there.
very interesting strategy. That's a I no one else, like, we're getting close to 40 guests in 4 months on the Passive Income Podcast, and nobody else has said that to me about, "Let's look at the last 5 days of the lows and set a limit order at just for 1 share and see where we're at." Grab that 1 share at,
Yeah,
say that 5-day low is $60, just throwing out a random number. You get that 1 share, and then you start to look at it closer because, "Hey, this just hit that,
yeah.
4, 5, 6-day low." That's an extremely interesting strategy.
And you know
Love it
what's
a
neat
lot.
about it? When it happens, it usually ends up going lower because that's the
Right.
kind of way levels work, right? When you crack a level, like a weekly low, people are getting nervous and it goes down more, right? So,
Right,
and
right.
the other beauty about an ETF and SCHD in particular, if it's dropping, it usually comes back fairly because maybe there's a few stocks that are dropping, but there's something else that's taking its place that's going to do
Sure.
better at the same time, right? I mean that's how ETFs work, right? And it tends to drop with the whole market, but those stocks are such quality that they're going to come back. And even when they don't, as dividend investors, love it because now you can buy more shares and get more, buy more dividend, right? Buy
Yeah,
more
buy
income.
more income at a lower
Yeah,
price. That's what we all want. Just
exactly.
keep rolling it in. I'm gonna share.
Yeah, and I'm following it since, like I said, it was the first stock I picked on my own, and that was in 2018. So, and I wasn't investing a whole lot back then. It was just a little bit here and there. And then I got back into it, around COVID when a lot of people got into it more. I was doing a little bit,
Yep.
but then I really got into it. And then, like I said, I got a little crazy and starts because everything was going up. But if I had just stuck with SCHD, I would be killing it.
Right, right. I am gonna share a screen. I think for those watching on YouTube can see this screen. I'm quite sure you've seen my tweets over the past few days about me potentially
Yeah,
investing in an American company, and you will love the results of this poll that I ran on Twitter.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
493 votes, just shy of 500 votes,
Mm,
and you will see SCHD is well over 50%
right?
of the
And I
4
was saying, like,
three
when there's such
options plus other.
yeah, when there's such like a bandwagon love for something, usually I get afraid. I'm like, okay, what am I missing? And
Yeah.
I want to know if people do know something that's wrong with CTF, please let us know. Like I'm doing research, and there are things, it is very focused. It's only got 100 stocks, so it's not like there's other ETFs, dividend ETFs that have a lot more stocks. Like a VYM is always something that's compared to it,
Right.
and it has over 400 stocks. So there's a lot more diversity going on,
Well, and
diversification happening there.
there's also other ETFs that have way less companies within their portfolio as well, so you
Yeah,
kinda have to, look at both sides of that
yeah.
coin.
It doesn't have REITs. It doesn't have a lot of utility stocks, and right now it doesn't have a lot of energy. But in the past it has. So those are things you just got to know what you're missing, and you can get other ETFs or other stocks to kind of fill in those gaps as well. But overall, it's really been great. And but the future, who knows what the future holds? But when you got quality companies, you'll probably do all right.
Yeah, exactly. So help me a little bit with my own research because obviously
Mhm.
my followers on Twitter are telling me if you're going to invest in an American US company, that's the one to start with. What are the top companies in SCHD right now?
Yeah, so they just did a little bit, not a full rebalance, but a shuffle. They do a rebalance in March every year, but every year they do a shuffle. And
Right.
Verizon is actually on top right now, which is very interesting. But
Yeah,
what's
very.
interesting is, yeah, the top 10 is only it's 4% each stock, about 4%. And then
Yep.
after that, it filters through. So you get it's like 40% in the top 10. So you really do need to look at that top 10 and make sure you like what's there. But you've got Texas Instruments, you've got Broadcom, you've got BlackRock, you've got Cisco, that sort of stuff. Pepsi, Coke is near the top. It was in the top. It's out now, but it's still
Right.
there. It's like 12. You're still getting significant, like those solid companies. They're all. I
Yeah.
mean, so you're getting like right now the dividend yield is 3 point something, and you're getting 13% growth. Like that's incredible. Like if you've ever heard the story of Warren Buffett like investing in Coke and what he's done with that, I've been looking. So when I heard that story, I'm like, let me find a stock that can do that. So
Right.
basically, 2 years, his dividends pay for his entire initial investment every 2 years, right? So,
Yeah.
but Coke's not done in that time. Coke was already a
Mhm.
big company when he invested in it. So
For sure.
it hasn't grown like crazy since he started. I don't think so. It mostly just steady growth
Yeah.
and steady. I think on average like 6 to 8% dividend growth over that time.
Right. I guess you would have
And
to look
and
back to
that's
see how old he was when he first started, because he's, like, over 90 now, and
yeah. It
what
was in the
Coke
80s. It
is
was
what,
1988.
130 or 40 years old, so you'd have to kinda look
Yeah, he bought it
at the
in
years that
19.
actually went by, right?
Yeah, late. It's been 30 some years he's had it, right? It's in the late 80s he bought it. But I mean, that's all. We're all capable of buying a stock like that grows 8-10% that gets the market, but with a nice dividend kicker, a nice dividend growth kicker of
Yeah.
6-8%. That's not crazy. SCHD is doing 12. That's not going to last forever.
Right.
It's been doing it for 5 years, though. It's pretty good track record. But maybe if we say it'll get 8 in the future over the next 30 years, if we can do that, you're going to get some amazing returns
Yeah, that's
compounded.
pretty good.
It's
That's a
amazing.
great return for a lot of people, right? 8% a year for 30 years. Who
Yeah, and that's
What
just the dividend
20-year-old
growth.
or 25-year-old wouldn't take that all day long if they
Exactly.
knew what they
That's
were
just
doing
dividend
at
growth.
that age,
We're
right?
talking capital appreciation on top of that as well. A lot of times, like some of the stuff I've looked at, which is really interesting about dividend growth, is you can kind of expect a capital appreciation return that's equal to the dividend growth with good solid companies, because that dividend is going to act like an anchor to the price. It's never going to go too low or too high. It's going to kind of, go with that growth. So
Yeah.
you can really, expect a good on both sides, 8% growth on the dividend and 8% growth on the capital. So it's hard to beat,
Yeah, very, very difficult to beat, right?
and it's cheap. It's a
Outside of
0.06 cost on it too. Expense ratio, amazing.
outside of SCHD,
Mhm.
the ETF, what else has you excited? Like anything in REITs, in banks, financial sector, energy,
Yeah,
consumer
yeah.
staples?
So
There's got to be something else that you also are almost as high on, or
yeah, well,
what's
I
number
really
2, I
have
guess?
learned.
What's number 2, 3, and 4 in your portfolio? Not necessarily in your portfolio, even just on your watch list. What
Yeah,
excites you beyond
yeah. Like I said,
the
I have a lot.
SCHD?
I have too many stocks. I fall in love with too much. And what I've learned is like, okay, let's try to scale back on adding new stocks, but let's work on the ones that I have that I like
Yep.
and wait for great buy opportunities when those go down. Like really be patient, only
Yeah.
buy on nice drops, and it really works well. And then slowly some of the stuff I don't like, if it goes up, let's start getting rid of that and putting it into the nice stuff. And when in
Into
doubt,
something else.
SCHD. When in doubt, SCHD. But I do like, I love, Microsoft, Apple, um, Visa, Mastercard are fantastic. Like,
Yeah.
look at Visa. Visa's a perfect example. I've been investing in Visa for 3 or 4 years now. Anytime it's under $200, I buy it. Every time. If
Right.
it's above $200, I don't touch it. It always works. Not to say it's going to go work in the future, but it's a
Again, this
great.
is not financial advice. We're just two
No,
guys talking.
yeah, this is what's worked for me, and like I'll even get nervous. There was a time there where it was dropping and dropping and went down to 180 something. I was like, oh geez, but I just know now. You buy it, and you know
Yep.
what? Within a month, it was back up. Now it's over I don't know, 225 or something like that. Mastercard's the same way. I like a lot of the. I don't know if you want to go sector by sector. You're welcome to suggest. I'm doing a lot of talking.
Whatever. Hey, wherever this conversation takes us, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I love McDonald's. McDonald's is another one.
Yep.
Anytime it goes below a certain point, and what's cool is that point has become like my cost average. So I know I have alerts set up, and as soon as they go below, I start looking and I buy a little bit. If it keeps dropping, like it's same thing, I buy more. The more it drops, the more I buy. But when you're doing that on a nice solid company like McDonald's or Visa, you don't have anything to worry about because we're doing this for the long term. So,
Right.
forget the next couple of months or even the year. You're going to look at this at 5, 10 years, and you're going to be happy, right? So there's a
100%.
lot like Nike's another one, Costco. There's so many stocks I like. But of course, Costco, you just don't want to buy these things when they're just high flying. Like Costco's so expensive right now. Like I wouldn't touch it now, but when it comes down, if it goes down a lot, keep an eye on it.
For sure. Interesting. Very interesting strategies. I love the way that you keep a close eye on almost everything, it sounds like, and
Yeah.
and really
Well, and
look.
that's the benefit to having a lot of stocks. I don't recommend it, but you do see what's happening. Like, because I've got honestly like a little bit of everything. I got some
Yeah.
really bad growth names that got killed. I've got SPACs from listening to like Jim Cramer and nonsense, and like just I learned a lot. I learned a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah.
Well, and that's the whole point is we all learn a lot and we learn from our mistakes. We know we've made those mistakes. We learn from them, we move on and improve our strategies in the future. And it sounds like you've done a great job of improving those strategies and really doing your best to, you know, again, I know you're not trying to time the market. You're just trying to
Yes.
find, hey, if I can find a great entry point and
Yeah.
I'm just gonna pick random company A, B, C, or D, doesn't matter, and it's like, okay, today it's at 175, but tomorrow it's at 165, and I buy in at 165, then,
Yeah.
again, not timing the market, I'm just doing my best to kinda get in at that best entry point for me, right?
You really do want that cushion that value investors talk about. It's a really worthwhile thing, and I'm always studying and learning, and I follow a lot of people on Twitter, and I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I read a lot of books, and there is value to like learning some of the fundamentals and the intrinsic value when you're in the individual stocks for sure. You just don't want to be like 2021, 22 is such a good example. Like anything you bought in 21 is down now. Like and some of it's down big time.
Right.
So if you were understanding fundamentals, it would have been hard, but you would have been like, oh, I'm out right now. Like I'm not buying this stuff. It's just too expensive. And then you'd be buying now when things are down. And in the long run, yeah, you'll probably be fine. But some of that growth stuff is never going to get back to where it was in 21, right?
Well, the last 3 years overall have just been crazy, obviously with COVID, but, like, you look at March 2020 when the world shut down, right?
Hmm.
There was lockdowns all of a sudden, Canada, the US, Europe, Australia, the whole world got shut down in March 2020. Stocks plummeted, and, I wish I had more cash on hand in March
Oh, tell me
2020. You
about it.
could have picked up so many great companies
Yeah.
at, like, such a ridiculous discount because they were well below their actual value in March
Hmm.
2020. And then,
Yep.
like you said, you go through 2021 and even into the beginning of 2022, and all of a sudden these stocks rebound. Oh, everything's great, rosy, you know, big time great. And you get to the end of 2022 and you're like, oh, what just happened?
Oh, wow. But dividend stocks did so much better, and I started transferring my portfolio to more dividend stuff, like back because that's the way I
Yeah.
started, and then I went back to it, and I got a little worried in at some point in 21, and oh, I'm so happy I did. Like, and I was buying
Yeah.
because I was buying. That's another thing. I was buying healthcare, U.S. healthcare, when nobody was really interested. Everybody was not even looking. It was cheap, and now it's flying. Like I'm up 40% more on a lot of those stocks, like
Wow.
AbbVie and Bristol Myers. Like now Merck, I wouldn't touch them. Now they're way too expensive. But and they're what? And they're probably still going up right now, but not advice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. One thing, okay, actually, a few things that I kind of need to touch on with you as a Canadian living in the
Hmm.
U.S. And for those of my listeners and followers who've been following along, like I said, we've had close to 40 guests now in 4 months, and it's been a fairly even split of Americans and Canadians. You're definitely the first Canadian living in the US. So I definitely have to know this. Every single one of my American guests have owned or held Realty Income ticker symbol, and I just
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on that? Do you hold any or any
Yeah,
any
like
thoughts
I said,
on
I've got it
Realty
all.
Income?
I've got it all. I've got it all. No, and the ones that are good, I continue to add, and O is a good one. It's just it's so solid. Like the downside to me is
Yeah.
that it doesn't have tremendous dividend growth. I'm a dividend growth investor. I love my dividend growth, and it's got like a 2%.
Don't they give a dividend raise every quarter?
They do, but it's like half a penny.
A
It's
small,
not it's tiny, but they're always doing it, and that's what
right.
it is. It's just steady, steady,
The
steady.
consistent growth over time, whether it's
Yeah.
whatever that small fraction is every quarter, but still grow, grow,
It's
grow,
solid. I mean, it's
grow,
like a
grow.
savings account. It's like a savings account with a nice 4%, 5% yield on it, right? It's a safe place to put your money. I mean, it does
Where do
drop.
you
It'll drop
bank that
every
gives
once
you
in a while.
4 or 5% on a savings account?
Yeah, yeah. Well, now you can in the U.S. you can get that on some of these online savings accounts. It's pretty crazy. Canada,
Really?
how's that in Canada? You can't get a like Tangerine accounts used to be pretty good.
Actually, maybe. I haven't looked into Tangerine or any of some of those online accounts.
Yeah, I don't think they're there. I still have a Tangerine, and I haven't really looked at it in a while. But like I had a 3% back in the day when the interest rates were low.
Right.
So I'm surprised. Like they're just making money.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll talk about that. The Canadian banks know how to make money.
Well,
They are
yeah, let's
so
get into that next because Canadian banks do know how to make money. And I mean, the big five, and you can count National as the big six, and they all just make money. They make money for their investors.
yeah,
I've had so many guests on the podcast that are so happy to hold them because it's like, hey, every quarter they're just paying me, right? So,
yeah.
um,
Well, I wanted
go
to
ahead
ask
and
you now. I've been wanting to ask you this question though. What do you think? So in Canada, in the US, there's 30-year fixed rate mortgages.
right,
Okay, which is amazing when you think about that. So I got
yeah,
a 3 something percent mortgage when I moved here, and it's locked in for 30 years. And now they're way up, and I'm like, wow, that's great,
yeah,
right?
you're doing good
Canada,
because like the interest rates, yeah, variable rate interest.
right?
Variable rate is great when the interest rate goes down. Not
Yes,
so
but
great when
now
it
is
skyrockets
there?
like it has over the last 2 years, right?
Yeah. So is there any concern over the next few years with this big jump in interest rates that
Yep.
people won't be able to afford their mortgages, and some of these bank stocks might not be as stable as they have been? What do you think?
Well, that's kind of a two-part question.
Hmm.
So personally, yeah, right now I am in a 5-year fixed, so I'm good for I think 3 more years.
Hmm.
And then I'm like, well, what's going to happen at the end of that 3 years? When we
Right.
get into 2026 or whatever, are the interest rates going to go back down to something reasonable where I can again lock in at a term where it's like, okay, I can actually afford this, or
Yeah. I mean,
do I
you're
have to sell
probably
my
not going to
house,
get like
right? Like
2 or
sell my
3
house
like
and
you
go
did.
live in a cardboard box on the downtown east side of Vancouver, right? Like
Right. Right.
I wouldn't do
But
that. I'd go live in a treehouse. I'd do like hero dividend and get off the grid.
Fred, yeah, you might have to. I
uh,
mean, but and then think about the people that's happening to today, right? Like how many people is that
yeah,
happening to now? So I'm kind of watching these. Like I invest in TD. I love the Canadian banks, and I want to get more in, but I'm kind of
yeah.
just watching this and seeing what's going to happen. Uh,
So, like I said, that was kind of a two-part question. The flip side of that, when you're looking at as from an investor at the Canadian banks,
mhm.
regardless of the mortgages, they are still making money hand over fist
Yeah,
in other ways, right? Whether
yeah,
it's even just like all the monthly fees that add up, and
yeah. I
they
mean,
have so
and
many
that's
different ways
something,
of making money.
right? And that's
And
something you
obviously,
realize, like
the
the difference
mortgages are one
between
of
the
the big.
U.S. Yeah, the
Sorry, go
difference
ahead.
in the US and Canada is that there's so much competition here for everything, right? Like
Right.
in Canada, there's those 5 banks and not much else. So they can get away with charging all sorts of fees and doing all and not raising their interest rates like that they're paying out, a lot. They can, same thing with the telecoms. You can't. What your choice is, Rogers, Bell, or Telus. Like, what are you going to do? And they all charge it
Yeah.
high, like the highest rates in the world. Like, I mean, I moved down here and I was getting unlimited everything for like $45, everything, internet, calling, text. Where back in Canada, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going over too many texts, too much data. Like always nervous about that and paying like double the amount for it. It's
Yeah.
crazy. But it's good
Yeah,
for the
so
investor.
again,
I've
for
heard you
those
say it, right? It's good for the investor.
yeah, for those listening or watching that don't know, Canada does pay the highest, cell phone rates in the world, and that was kind of one of the other sectors I did wanna talk about is the telecoms. I'm I do have a small position in Bell. I'm starting to dollar cost average into Bell more and more, and you're right, as an investor, they are great companies because they don't have competition other than the 3 of them themselves. They're
Mhm.
competing with each other. And so, yeah, I don't know if you just wanna speak more onto the, I guess, even comparisons of the US and Canada or what you think. Obviously, you've already compared that saying my cell phone bill was, like, less than half by
Mhm.
moving to the US or being in the US, so
Yeah, I
any
mean,
telecom companies that you would invest in, like Bell or AT&T or Verizon?
yeah, so I'm in AT&T and T and Verizon. They were both early on picks when it was just like, oh, look at these yields, right? And
Yeah,
but honestly, they've been beat up, but I think they're decent. Like those, and after AT&T cut their dividend, which hurt, but since then it's been, look at the performance. It's actually been pretty reasonable. It's been pretty
right,
good, and then the price drops so much, the yield is still up there, so it's not bad. And we've seen the worst of it. I think it's not going to get much worse. And Verizon, same thing. It's been beat up so much. Like the fact that the way I look at it too, like it passes the filters of SCHD. There's a reason why it's where it is in the top 10 for SCHD. It's have you heard of the dogs of the Dow investing style, where you
right.
pick like the worst performers from the Dow with the highest dividend yields, and Verizon's right there. And it works like, I think they say like 50-60% of the time, but I don't know. I don't see it getting much lower than it was in October, and it's still paying a good, I think, a 6% yield. And then
Nice.
as far as the Canadian ones, I mean, same thing, just solid. Like you're not getting a huge gain in the price, but nice dividends, and that's nothing's changing. The
Yeah.
laws completely change up there, which I guess is possible, but highly unlikely. Those are just steady, and
Probably
that's
not anytime soon, right?
right, and that's the way I look at it. Like Canadian dividend investing is very like higher yield, very safe, solid, no huge fluctuations. Like I'm looking for, actually, I would love to move one of my mutual funds that's in an RSP in Canada, because I can't add more funds to my RSP. So that's something that's interesting. If you move to the US, you can keep your RSP, but you can't, which is like a 401k in the US. You
Yeah.
can keep it, but you can't add more funds to it. But you can move things around within it. So I can
Interesting.
sell my mutual fund and move it to an ETF, that sort of thing. I can buy stocks, I can do whatever within it with the money that's in it. So I have a mutual fund that I would love to move into, something cheaper where I'm not paying like 2%. And some of the ones I've looked at is like VDY, XIC. Um, those are kind of, and VDY, I look at them like good times and bad times. Like it barely moves, and it pays, I think, a 4 or 5% yield. It looks
Right.
pretty nice, but there's nothing. I'm looking for something like SCHD with more growth to it, more dividend growth, and it's hard to find.
That brings I didn't even know I was gonna ask this, but
Mm.
how does that work with your TFSA? Is it
So
similar
TFSA is
or
different. You can't use it anymore, unfortunately. If your primary residence is in the U.S. as a Canadian, yeah, you can't. You have to, like, I think you have to sell out.
oh my goodness.
Yeah, unfortunately, and fortunately, I wasn't using it yet. I used it. I put money in, but I was one of those people that didn't understand that the benefit to it is buying stocks.
Right, right.
I only had cash in it, right? And then afterwards, when I learned, I'm like, oh my god! Now I tell all my friends in Canada, I'm like, you've got to use your TFSA. That thing's beautiful. Like
Yeah.
what an amazing investing tool. And because
Every
here,
month I get dividends in my TFSA that are 110% tax free, and
yeah,
I'm 110% okay with that.
yeah, and here they've got limits to it. Like a lot more limits. Like if it's 6,000 is the max, let's say, that's it every year, and it doesn't add. If you missed out, you can't
It's not
keep adding, like
retroactive the way
Canada.
the TFSA
Yeah,
is. I was
yeah,
actually just
and
explaining this a couple, I think just my last guest with, European DGI saying in Canada, the TFSA, it was started around 2006 or 7, and it was started at $5,000, then every
Yeah.
year was added $5,000,
Yeah.
5,000, then went up to 55 for a few years, then went up to 6,000 for a few years, and I believe it's
Hmm.
now up to 6,500, but it
It
is
is.
retroactive. So if you're a 20-year-old kid right now, or 25 or whatever,
Yeah.
you have retroactive, you can invest up to I'd have to add it up. It's gotta
Right.
be about $95,000, right? Maybe 100,
Um,
it's somewhere in that
Incredible.
range.
So basically, so it starts at 18, and then whatever it was that year, you get, so you get 5, you get 55, you get 65, and it just keeps adding. And then when
Right.
you start, you've got all that room. Yeah, here is not like that at all. If you didn't give your 6,000, it's gone. You missed it. And the 401k
Wow.
works the same way. Whereas the RSP is the same thing. If you don't use it, that contribution limit just keeps adding up.
Right.
And that's nice. There's pros and cons though. There's a lot of great things here too. I mean, there's so many, there's so many nice like online brokerages here with zero fees and all sorts of great stuff. It's so easy to invest here, and there's so many great stocks and like a low barrier to entry.
Yep.
But you get really those nice, the nice tax accounts in Canada are really nice.
How long have you been living in the US now?
About 5.5, almost 6 years.
Right, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Oh, yeah.
And
So
I don't know,
you guys got to
we've
help me.
kinda
You guys got
touched
to
on
help
a
me. Div Twitter's got to help me find the best Canadian ETF, dividend growth ETF. VDY is what I'm looking at now, but I need some help.
okay, Div Twit, do you hear that? Let's give Craig, some not financial advice.
Just some suggestions. I'm going to do the research, but I like the
Exactly.
Canadian. There's some Canadian bank ETFs which are really nice, but I
Yep.
mean, like something like VDY, it almost is a bank ETF anyways, because the dividend stocks in Canada are the financials, are the telcos, are there's a few energy companies in there. I hold Enbridge too. I've got Enbridge is another one I've got. That's it. So it's kind of already in there. So VDY kind of covers it all as far as dividends go.
Right, going back to, the AT&T dividend cut, because I was thinking this just, last week, maybe it was the week before, time flies pretty quickly, and
Hmm.
we went through the Algonquin Power
Right.
dividend cut, and, just kinda what are your thoughts there? And I'm kind of looking at that similar to the AT&T where they
Yeah.
did that cut, but they've been able to kind of restructure, rebalance, and hopefully get, redirected and get on a more proper path, and this is what I'm
Yeah.
hoping for Algonquin Power. Again, I have a small position in AQN, so I'm not overly concerned about a few $100, but I do obviously would still like to see that few $100 not turn into 0. I'd rather see that turn into 1,000 or whatever, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you, like dividend cuts are the thing I worry about the most because
Yeah,
they really do. It's a double gut punch. I mean, they not only do you lose that income, but the stock gets killed after it too.
yeah,
It really hurts to see it happen, and it takes a long time to come back. But they often do it for a good reason,
yeah,
and it does tend to work out. And you're we can't put ourselves in this situation. We don't know, but it would be much better to buy after it happens and looking at it after and then saying, okay, weighing it out, where are we going from here? That's not too bad. But when you're in it from before, it's hard. But if you have a long road, you can hold on, see. And then, you know what? At a certain point, if it gets too bad, you get out. Sometimes you got to cut your losses. I've learned that too. Like,
right,
you got to cut your losses sometimes and just find stuff you really like, that you've had experience with, that you can follow, uh, and invest in that. Like the Warren Buffett quote, where you don't have to swing at every pitch. There's no strikes being called. You don't
yeah,
need to buy. Wait, just be patient. Find some good ETFs. I like now. If I restarted, I would say start with ETFs until you've learned more. Keep learning. Invest all the time, every month. Put money into that ETF, an index ETF or something like that, a dividend growth ETF, not just any ETF.
yeah,
And then slowly you see companies, solid companies you like, buy a little, get a flavor for it, wait it out, see it go a little bit at a time. And then you start seeing ones that are great. And then when those dip down, then you can start loading up, but do it a little bit at a time, right?
I've lived on both sides of that sword that you just mentioned. Getting in after the dividend cut, I was lucky enough to kind of wait through the Ryokan dividend cut, and I got in at what I think is a good time. And now it's one of my largest positions because
Right.
the price was lower, and the dividend is still actually quite reasonable even after the
Yeah.
cut. So,
Yeah.
but on the other side of that sword with Algonquin Power going, yeah, this hurts. That dividend cut hurts. The prices has been, kicked in the head, kicked while it's down.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you're just hoping, okay, well, where is this going to be in 5, 7, 10, 15 years, right?
Yeah. What's the yield now? What's the around what, you know?
Sorry for which AQN
Yes,
or
yeah, yeah. AQN.
oh, uh, not right off the top of my head. I'd have to look
Mhm.
it up. I think honestly, I think even after the yield, after the cut, it was still a decent yield again, but because the price had been the price is
Yeah.
slaughtered when a dividend cut happens, so
Yeah. 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 Yeah, well, hopefully it works out. I mean, I had a friend who was asking me about it, and I said I just gave him that Warren Buffett advice, like, because the yield was starting to get real juicy as it was dropping. And I
right.
said, and he said, "You think they're going to cut?" I'm like, "Who knows? But if there's a
But
chance,
yes,
just
who knows, but yeah, we all saw the writing on the wall there.
right. Just what's it's not worth the risk because I've done it. I've made the mistake. Like I'm not sitting up here saying, "Oh, I invest in only the best." I've made the mistakes. I've seen it happen.
We all have,
It
right?
hurts. Yeah, it hurts, man. And yeah, sometimes you got to cut your losses. Sometimes you sit it out. What I've learned though is often you sit it out, and it does work out in the long run. So I don't know.
Yeah,
Every situation is different, right? You really got to look at it and talk to people. Get there's forums out there. The one thing I do get scared about Twitter is there is a lot of an echo chamber going on. Like if you ask people what their favorite stock is, their favorite utility stock, their favorite REIT, you get a lot of the same answers. And I do start to get worried that, talking to the guy who's like all into SCHD and everybody else is, I, I, say, I sound funny, but it's so true.
yeah.
You really got to watch out when everyone's headed one direction. Like, really make sure you're not just jumping on the bandwagon and do your own research. It could be great, right? Like that's what I found with SHD. I found it before, like before it was hot. I like before it was trendy. But I'm not getting off the bandwagon now that everybody's on it. It's something special.
You're driving the bandwagon, you're driving the bus.
Yeah, yeah, maybe.
Nice.
Yeah, it's
Good
fun.
stuff.
It's fun. I was trying to think of a way to like get on Twitter and like stand out a little bit. So I'm like, you know what? I don't know that much about other stuff. I'm learning, but I do
Yeah.
feel like I know a little bit more than most know about SCHD. I'm not the master of it, but I learn and I listen to enough about it. I read a lot about it. So there's some advantage I have there. So let me go at Twitter from this angle. And I'm reading all this information and looking at the price every morning. So why don't I share that every morning? Why don't I share the price at the close? Which I didn't do today yet, but I will. Like every day I share the price, the opening price, closing price every day. Every day
Yep.
I find an article. I have a Seeking Alpha account, so I get an article from them. I share it, and I'm always trying to share as much information as I can about the ETF. So hopefully people enjoy it. I've had a few people say, "Thanks so much. You're really helping me, like,
Yeah,
track what's going on."
that's always fun on Twitter when people, like, are appreciative of what you're doing, even just, like, what you think might be a random tweet, and they're like, "Hey,
Right.
actually, this helped me out." Right? Like,
Yeah.
"Okay, well,
Yeah.
good." Do your own research, do your own due diligence, but I'm happy that I was able to help you find this
Yeah,
article
like
or
it's
video or
amazing when
whatever,
like I
right?
see you tweet like that poll you did there, right? Like it's really cool to see so many people respond to something and there's some advice that is very thorough and very like well researched and like you can learn a lot from these guys that have been investing for 10, 20 years. The other day I talked to a guy who bought SCHD when it first came in 2011. His so SCHD trades at like 76, let's say right now. He bought it at 26. Sorry, no, he bought probably lower than that. His average cost is 26, and he has like thousands and thousands of shares. Like it's so
Wow.
neat. I'm like, wow, and he's like, I can tell you you're on to a good one. I'm like, okay, cool. It's really
Awesome.
interesting. Hmm.
Awesome. Yeah, this has been great. We've covered a lot of different sectors kind of randomly. This has been a very different type of episode of the Passive Income Podcast, and I knew
Good.
it was going to be, which has
Got to
been
shake it
great. Shaking it up, shake and bake.
up.
Yeah, we've kind of touched on some REITs, the banks and the telecoms and energy, and sort of we've been a little bit all over the place.
Yeah.
We haven't really touched on technology. Well, I guess we have touched on technology a little bit, but anything further in the technology sector that you want to mention
Um,
or talk about?
yeah, I mean, there's like I mentioned, like Apple and Microsoft. There's some nice like pay small dividends, but they grow them quite nicely, and they're amazing
Right.
companies. Like, and again, just don't just jump in blindly because you like it because you have an iPhone. Like, wait for a good entry point. Learn a little something, pay attention to the cycles, listen for bad news. Bad news comes out, stock prices go down. It's still a good company. Look for those entry points. That
Yeah.
especially with individual stocks. Like I'm going the extra mile and doing it with an ETF. Again, that's unnecessary. I do it because I can and it's fun. But with these individual stocks, you got to give yourself some room, a buffer there for when bad things happen, to keep you invested. And the dividend helps you keep invested. So I mean, look for tech stocks. There's some good like chip stocks. Like I'm in Intel. It's been beat up, but I
Yep.
think it's a good story. I think it's going to come around. They're doing a lot of good things. They've got the dividend yield is amazing, and that one worries me. As long as they don't cut it, everything's fine. If they cut that one, woo, watch out. That's tough. That would be tough. But
I
yeah,
think
I'm
at
in some
one
other.
point too, you even mentioned Texas Instruments, which
Yeah.
I would consider
Yes.
a technology stock as well. Well, for
Yes.
sure, a
Yeah,
technology
they're
stock.
chip. Yeah, and they just their earnings just. I mean, I don't know when this is going to come on, but it's so what January 24th right now. The earnings just came out and they were fantastic. They beat
Right.
again, and they're solid. They're so solid. They have like 17% dividend growth. I can't remember what the starting yield is, but I think it's around 3. And that's one of the ones I own in SCHD. It's always there. So I don't. I would buy it if on a really big dip, and I was going to buy in October, but I was so excited. There's so many stocks that were down in October. Like I loaded up SCHD, and that's another thing. Like, what do you do when everything drops? You like so many stocks? I'm
Yeah,
like,
you,
okay,
you
I'm good with SHD. I know I'm getting a basket of 100 solid companies that are growing their dividends, and those companies, like they're filtering to find the companies that aren't going to cut their dividends, right? Like
right.
that's exactly what you want in a dividend stock, right?
On so
So
many past episodes of the podcast, I've said this isn't Pokemon. You can't catch them all.
mm-mm.
And I think that's what you were looking at back in October. You're looking at, I want to buy all of these, but there's no possible way I can buy everything, right?
Yeah,
Like,
and I feel so much better when I grab SHD, and I know it rebounds, and it's one of those stocks. Try it, go buy some. It's like I sound like a drug dealer. Just try some. Just try it. You'll love it. It's like I feel so good, like getting that 3% yield and it's growing. Like, I mean, at 10%, if it grows 10%, like it's paying like $2 a year right now. So if it grew at 10%, in what? In 7 years, it's gonna double. It's gonna be paying $4 a share. Like,
yeah.
it's beautiful.
That's a reverse drug dealer, by the way. Drug dealers empty your bank accounts, but what you're saying is I'm trying to put money into your bank account or into your
Yeah,
brokerage account or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. I tell you, it never feels bad. Even when I buy when it's a little pricier, I still feel good. When I see the shares adding up, like my goal right now is to get to 1,000 shares,
Nice.
and I want to do it by the end of 2025. So the next couple of years, and I'm
Yeah,
at
you'll get there.
465 right now. So, yeah,
Awesome.
I'm just putting aside a little money every month, and like I said, like loading it in at those proper levels, and following that strategy, and we're chipping away.
Awesome. I just have one more kind of
Yeah, good.
thing that I wanted to talk about is as a Canadian living in Florida, how do taxes work for you? Do you still pay taxes? Do you I'm assuming you work in the US, you must.
Yeah.
And obviously you pay taxes to the IRS for earning an income in the US. Do you still pay taxes to the CRA, Canada Revenue
So
Agency, as
it's
well?
funny because I do have like some interest income and stuff like that in Canada, right? And
Mhm.
on my like non-RSP stuff. And the first year I had to do it because it was half and half. The second year I was fully here and I still did my taxes. I'm like, I just want to be sure. And they just I paid. I'm like, they didn't ask, I just paid it. And they sent the money back. And they're like, the next year I did it again just to make sure. And they sent it back again. I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna stop. I don't need to do it. So you don't need to do it because you do any income you make, you have to account for it in the US on your US taxes.
Right.
You count it as foreign income and then you get a credit back for it. So, and I've
So
heard
you're
people
in the
say like,
US and you filed to the IRS, but you counted as foreign income because you're Canadian?
well,
Or am
because
I
because I'm not an expert. I do my own taxes, but it's like every time
Yeah.
I do it, it's like dig in and then forget everything after I'm done.
Yeah, no, I
But
understand that.
I use
So
Intuit, TurboTax. It does a lot of it for you. But basically, um, I don't have to pay directly on my Canadian taxes. It counts as income as a U.S. resident, so it
right.
counts towards
So
my income here. So indirectly, I guess the money does probably get back to Canada. I'm not. Don't quote me on that, but it does
right.
count. It counts as income, but I don't have to file it in Canada. And then I've also heard people say like, as an American, they get worried about having to pay taxes on getting a dividend stock, a Canadian dividend stock like TD, let's say.
Mhm.
But you actually get credit back, so you do have to pay the holding tax, like a 15% holding tax. When you first get your dividend, they'll take 15% out. But at tax time, you actually get that money back. You
Right.
get it back, and then you pay your income tax in the US on it, which is a lot lower. Like Florida is beautiful for taxes. So my income taxes are a lot lower here. So I don't mind buying Canadian dividend stock and paying the US tax on it, my US tax rate instead of the Canadian tax rate. So it's not bad.
Interesting.
It's not bad at
Interesting.
all. Like
So
people are afraid to do it, but I would I mean check with your own tax people. But
and yeah, and figure it out whichever state or province you might be in
yeah,
because yeah,
yeah.
and this is the reason I ask this is obviously because right now I'm thinking, do I buy that one share of SCHD or one share of Coca-Cola or one share of
Mhm.
Realty Income or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I know as a Canadian, I need to hold that in my RRSP and not my TFSA. But beyond that, I really don't know what I'm doing to
Yeah,
be
I mean,
110% honest.
if you're holding it in there, I think you're good. There's a tax treaty between the two countries,
Yeah.
and I think you're good. If you hold it in a tax-free account, you're not paying the taxes on that, so you're good. You just have to worry about the exchange, the dollar exchange, right?
Yeah, that's the big one is like, oh, I think I looked up, I looked them all up and they were all I think in the 66 US range, like $60 US for Coke and 66 for SCHD or maybe Realty Income. They're
Almost
all sort of in that
76.
similar
Yeah,
range,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
why I put those in that poll because they're like, hey, these are all in that $60 US range, but oh, that's getting very close to 100
yeah,
Canadian dollars for
yeah.
me, right?
That's yeah.
Or about 90 probably, 90,
Yeah,
90.
I mean, I'll tell you when one of the things that started my like investing journey is when I sold my house in Canada, I had some money and I was like, okay, am I going to put it down on the mortgage or am I going to like do something with this, right? And I said,
Mhm.
well, let me look at investing because like I said, I had that 30-year fixed mortgage. I'm like, I can get more than 3.66 investing, especially at that time. So
Yeah.
let me invest a good chunk of this. And that's what got me into it. But what happened is that I didn't want to move that money out of Canada because the exchange rate was so bad. So I left it in Canada for a while until the exchange rate got better. Like I just put it in a saving account. I got as high as interest I could get on a Tangerine account. I was getting
Yeah.
like 3% back then in 2017. And until the dollar got a little better for Canadians, I held it. And then I started, as soon as it got up, boom, 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 I just started moving it all over. And then I had it. I was like, what do I do with this? And I started investing.
Nice.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
I
No.
gotta say one thing. I gotta say one
Yeah.
thing. I remember my dad telling me in like the '80s when I was a kid, because as we talked about, I'm a little older than I look, I think. And
A lot.
yeah, I was a
You
kid in
don't
the
look
'80s.
like you don't look like you remember the '80s the way I do.
I remember it vividly. And my dad told me, like, people always talk about, oh, what would you do if you won $1 million, right? And my dad, I never heard this before. My dad said, I'd find a way to get it in an account that pays you 10% interest. I was like, what? There's such a thing? I didn't interest what? He's like, yeah, you
Yeah.
have that much money, you can get good interest. And this is back then, the rates were way higher. He goes,
Yeah.
and he's like, that's $100,000 a year. I was like, wait a second. I'm like, so I started thinking about dividend investing back then. So when it started coming to pick stocks, that's why I started looking at dividend investing. That's what got my brain going, right? And that led to SCHD.
Awesome. Well, shout out to your dad there for even just planting
Hmm.
that seed, right?
Yeah, he doesn't even know that story. He wouldn't even remember it. He would not. If he watches this, he'll be like, "Well, I said
Yeah,
that."
make sure you share this with him. Tell him you've got to
Yeah,
watch to the 56-minute mark, Dad.
there you go. There you go. Yeah, got to do something to get him
Awesome.
to watch.
So, yeah, like I just said, we're uh, closing in on a full hour here. This has been an amazing conversation, as I knew it was going to be. I've enjoyed having you on the Passive Income Podcast. And in closing, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, I just want to again thank you for having me on, and just remember we're all on a journey here. We're learning. Some of the things I said might not be exactly accurate. Check the facts yourself. Be
Yeah,
really get into it. If you want to invest, this is money we're talking. This is important stuff. Life is important. Having fun is important, but this you want to have fun in life. It's hard to have fun if you lose money, and
it's hard to have fun if you
you
don't
really,
have money, right? Like you
yeah,
can't
yeah.
you can't
Especially if
go
you
and
have
rent
it
a
and you
boat
lose
for
it.
a weekend without
Yeah,
money.
especially if you have it already and then you lose it, it's even worse. So,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, do you know, don't just take everything you hear at face value. Like really look into it. Figure this stuff out for yourself. It's a process, we're all
Yep.
learning. And enjoy the ride. It's fun.
Enjoy the ride. Great. With
Mhm.
that said, we're going to sign off. If you're still watching at the 57-minute mark, you do have to subscribe. Those are the rules. I mean, you're still here. Just hit that subscribe button. And thank you so much, Craig. You can find him on Twitter at SCHD ETF. Give him a follow. And yeah, awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on this episode of the Passive Income Podcast.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Subscribe.